Hey everybody, time for another Star Trek video, and this is going to be one of those where I just half-ass my way through it. That's right, it's not actually Trek Actually, and it's going to be not even half-assed. I'm going to quarter-ass my way through this one because this is a comment response video, which means that you have already done the work for me by leaving comments on my previous Trek Actually videos, and I am now just going to read the comments that you left, some of them, and say whatever inane horseshit pops into my brain. Let's get started. This first set of comments comes from my most recent Trek Actually video about how Deep Space Nine saved the Ferengi. This one is from Vesperitis, who says, I don't think you mentioned the time when Quark out-logicked a Vulcan out of a war by using simple economics. You are correct. I did not mention that. That is from the episode The Maquis Part 2, I think, where Quark is in the holding cell with Sikona, who is the Vulcan arms dealer who works with the Maquis, and he's trying to convince her using economic theory that the Maquis should not be escalating hostilities with the Cardassians at this point. They should be pressuring for peace and trying to de-escalate things because given the situation and everything being so tense, all sides want to see a peaceful resolution. So as Quark puts it, peace can be bought at a bargain price. It's one of those times when using economic theory metaphorically can be a very effective tool, can be potentially very persuasive. I don't mind that. I think that can work really well sometimes. I do object to people who use economic theory to render everything in terms of dollars and cents, which unfortunately more often than not is how it happens in real life when people frame everything in economic terms and they're literally assigning monetary values to things and then using that as a way of convincing people to make particular decisions. I don't really care for that so much. I don't like the commodification of everything. I think that's a really toxic, destructive thing that we do. But the way Quark does it, by using economic theory to sort of rhetorically argue or to frame the ideas in economic terms, to show you that if what you value is peace, then you can get that peace at a lower cost, meaning loss of lives, pain and suffering caused, violence committed, etc., then now is the time to go for peace because it can be bought at a bargain price. I think what Quark does in that scene is actually really smart and a good use of economic theory because he's not commodifying everything in literal terms. He's doing it rhetorically. I think that's really cool. Next comment is from Benjamin Brogren, who says, "Aw, what a missed opportunity. Instead of clasping your hands for the Patreon bit, you could have done the Ferengi hand bit." Boy, this is one of those comments that is both humbling and incredibly infuriating because I hate it when people rewrite my shit and make it better than I did. You're absolutely right, Benjamin. When I was doing the Patreon pitch at the end of that video and I go like, oh, thank you to my patrons so much, right? Totally should have done this. And now I'm going to go to my grave. Sorry that I didn't. And I can't do it again. I can't do it now because, even if I do another Ferengi-centered video, I can't do it then because it's not my idea. So basically what I'm saying is thanks for ruining that for me, Benjamin. No, it's a really good catch. And that would have been a really funny bit. And God, I wish I had thought of it. Next comment is from Osiris Malkovich. I thought Ferengi were vacuum desiccated and sliced into discs to be auctioned after they died. I'm sorry, what was that, nerd? I couldn't hear you over what a nerd you are. Yes, all right. A lot of people pointed this out because we have a lot of nitpickers in the Trek fan community. And yes, I said that Ferengi were cremated and sold off after they were died. But the episode says, no, they're not cremated. They're vacuum desiccated, which is a completely different process. The difference of that being incredibly relevant to the point I was making in the video. And it's completely reasonable that so many of you felt the need to point it out. And it wasn't just nerdy, pointless nitpicking at all. It was making a very important, valid point. So thank you so much for all of you, all several dozen of you who piped up like within moments of me saying that line in the video and typed it into the comment bar and said, oh, actually, they were vacuum desiccated. They weren't cremated. Thank you very much for contributing to the conversation in such a meaningful way. You Here's one from Robert Leverton. Gotta say, I loved Grand Nagus Zek. Wallace Shawn is so good as the over-the-top character. Yeah, I feel like I gave Zek kind of the short end of the stick in the video. I didn't talk about him all that much, aside from a couple of mentions. So let me just say it here and echo Robert's comment that Zek is a fantastic character. He is hilarious. And of course, Wallace Shawn, who is also known as a great playwright. He was in My Dinner with Andre. And he was also, of course, Vizzini in The Princess Bride, and he's great. I mean, it goes without saying that Wallace Shawn is a brilliant actor and just a brilliant creative mind in general. And as Zek, he is so funny. He is so funny that the moment in, I think it's Profit and Loss, when he realizes that Quark's partner is actually a woman, she's been disguising herself as a man, and he realizes that she's a woman, and his terrified, offended, grossed out shriek at realizing that it's a woman in his presence, wearing clothes, acting like a man. And he's like, it's a female. I mean, it's really good. It's really good. Yeah, Zek is awesome. I apologize to all the Zek heads out there for not giving him his due in the actual video, because he deserves it. Zek is a terrific comedic character in Deep Space Nine. Here's one from Caitlin L. Star Trek isn't family-friendly anymore. Meanwhile, in TOS, women have costumes that barely don't fall off their bodies, with exposed midriffs, thighs, often cleavage, etc. Yeah, there's that, and there's also Tasha Yar with her unspeakably dark character backstory that she mentions all the time. What with the rape gangs and all, that's not very family friendly. Imagine sitting down with your kids in like 1987, 1988, first season of TNG. Hey kids, this is the new version of the show I grew up watching, Star Trek. Let's gather together as a family, me and my spouse and our young children, and we'll watch Star Trek The Next Generation as a family. Oh, Tasha's talking about rape gangs. Oh, what's that, honey? What's that? 5-year-old child? What's a rape gang? Well, hey, what's that over there? Oh, I know. Let's watch Barney instead. Oh, shit, Barney doesn't exist yet. It's 1987. Guess they could have watched Sesame Street, but you get my point, right? There have always been elements of Star Trek that have been decidedly unfamily friendly, as Caitlin points out. And yeah, people watching it today who are like, I can't watch it with my kids anymore. Like, it's not a completely invalid point, because I do think the newer shows have been more markedly adult than the previous versions. But it's not like it's always been a fucking Pixar cartoon, right? There have always been adult elements. And even though it obviously appeals to kids and always has, it has always been targeted. I think the target audience for Star Trek has always been like teenagers and adults. It's never been like a kids show, even though it is often acceptable for kids. So yeah, as I said in the video, people who object to the new Star Trek shows for that reason, and who consider it not Star Trek because it's not as family friendly as the old stuff, just watch something else and shut up. Stop bothering the rest of us. Here's one from Gazebo. TNG. These stereotypians are stereotypically stereotypian. DS9. These are people? Life forms, little life forms, where are you? Yeah, isn't it amazing what a difference it can make to go from treating a trait as essential to a particular type of person to treating it as a cultural norm that may be true in many cases, but is not universally a part of that group's character. Like, that's really the major shift that DS9 did with the Ferengi. And that TNG did as well, because a couple people in the comments also mentioned Dr. Rega from a sixth season episode of TNG, where Dr. Rega was a Ferengi scientist who invented a form of multiphasic shielding, and he talked about how he experienced a lot of prejudice and discrimination and dismissal, not only from other Ferengi, but also from people outside of the Ferengi Alliance, because they viewed him as a Ferengi and assumed he didn't know what he was talking about and didn't take him seriously as a scientist. So the shift was that instead of saying all Ferengi are innately greedy and innately profit-centered and innately consumed with making money and seeing everything in commercial terms, Deep Space Nine and TNG said, no, Those are just cultural norms. It's not that every single Ferengi is born thinking and acting this way. It's not in their DNA. It's a cultural norm. And most of them act that way because that's what a cultural norm means. But not all of them do. They are individuals that have freedom of choice and have their own personalities, and some of them, perhaps even many of them, a minority, but a significant portion of them, don't choose to value these things or to behave in these ways. Makes a world of difference. Makes a world of difference. They've done something similar with the Klingons as well. Yeah, most of them are warriors. Most of them care about glory and honor in battle, but not all of them. Some of them have different goals, and that's what makes them feel more like real people, as opposed to plot devices. And here's one more from the Deep Space Nine saved Ferengi video from Light of Xeon. After the hints and references in the last few episodes, I sense an episode about Lwaxana Troi in the making. I want to thank you, Light of Xeon, for this suggestion, because it was not actually on my list until you said that, but now it is on my list. It is not an option in the current topic poll, which if you are a patron of mine, you can vote in the topic poll to pick the next Trek Actually topic. If you are a patron or a member of the channel through YouTube, you can vote in the poll to choose the topic for July's regulation Trek Actually video. But so the Lwaxana option is not in that one, but it'll probably be in the next one. And I just want to warn everybody, because I know Lwaxana has a lot of fans in the Star Trek fan community. A lot of people really like Lwaxana. As a lot of you already know, I do not like Lwaxana Troi. She is my least favorite character in the entire franchise. So when I do that video, I'm going to try to be cool about it and try to be sensitive about it and not be too mean. And, the point of it isn't like to just piss people off or upset people or make people feel bad for being Lwaxana fans, but I totally am not one of those people. So that video is going to be pretty negative about Lwaxana. So just keep that in mind. As you vote in that poll, whenever that is, if that is an option. Because I will definitely do a Lwaxana Troi video at some point, and it will not be complimentary to her because I do not like that character at all. So prepare yourself. Now, these next several comments are from my video about the Deep Space Nine episode Bar Association and how it illustrates how Deep Space Nine deals with labor relations. And this first one is from David Johnson, who says, "He was more than a hero. He was a Union man. All-time great line, and makes O'Brien an even better character. Also, do we have any indication that Rom started investigating Marxism due to his trip to the 1950s, or is that just a neat coincidence?" I think we can safely tuck that into the neat coincidence category. At the beginning of Bar Association, remember, Rom doesn't have any idea what a labor union is. Bashir has to explain to him the basic definition of what a union is and what it does. So I don't think Rom has any clue as to what any of that is, or of what Marx is, or socialist theory, or communist theory, or anything like that. I think he probably does a little bit of research. He probably reads like some Wikipedia articles, or Memory Alpha articles, I guess, since we're in the 24th century and it's Star Trek. But he does a little bit of research after he decides to start the Union, and that's where he finds the Marx quote that he throws in Quark's face later on. But no, I don't think we can assume, based on the textual evidence, that Rom did any sort of research into Marx or labor theory or anything like that prior to that episode. Zachary Hale, implying America wants to celebrate the working class is possibly the funniest thing you've ever said, Steve. Yes, you're right. That was an oversight on my part. What I should have said was not that America likes to celebrate the working class, but that America likes to give the appearance of celebrating the working class. Because you're right, one thing that America has never really ever done in any meaningful way is celebrate the working class. This is the United States, by God. We exploit the workers here. We don't celebrate them sincerely. No. We give them condescending pats on the back and say, hey, enjoy your day off. Some of you, not very many of you if you're actually a working class person, but the rest of us will enjoy our day off to honor you, the working class. Happy Labor Day. That's what we do in the United States. What, higher wages, health benefits, paid vacation? Get back to work. That's how we do it here in the USA, and that's why we're number one. Next comment is from BM. Aren't all of the actors, writers, etc. in Hollywood members of some of the strongest unions in the country? Why is it so taboo to bring it up on TV and film? Well, I don't know this for sure, but I suspect it has something to do with the fact that there is still management in Hollywood. I mean, there are still studio heads who are not members of the Writers Guild or the Actors Guild and are still in charge, ultimately, of the content that is created and released. And I'm sure a lot of them are not super comfortable with blatantly, strongly pro-union messaging being sent out. I mean, even though, yeah, you're right. The motion picture industry, the entertainment industry in general, is one of the most, if not the most, unionized industry in the entire country. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing. But that doesn't mean that the unions have 100% control over, say, the content of the films and TV shows that are being made. There are still people who work, who the union employees work for, who are bosses, who are management, who are not in the union, who view the union as an adversary or as a threat or as something that takes money out of their pocket, and they don't see it in a very positive light. So it's probably something to do with that. I don't know for sure, but that would be my guess. Now, these next several comments are from my previous comment response video. So they're in response to my responses to a whole bunch of other videos. This one is from Kevin Thomas, and it's about my video on whether or not Captain Sisko is a war criminal. And he's saying, oh, forget tricking the Romulans into joining the war. Remember when Sisko nuked that planet that one time? That was totally her idea. She totally pushed for that. Yes, Jadzia Dax was totally an enabler of Sisko's war criminal tendencies on more than one occasion. Yes, she did support him and sort of help him develop his plan to trick the Romulans into joining the Dominion War with Garrick. And yeah, the end of that episode where he poisons the planetary atmosphere in order to catch Eddington. Not only is Dax 100% on board with that, but she's like smiling and kind of giddy at the end of it. The last scene of that episode is Sisko and Dax without a hint of moral ambiguity or conflict, walking down the corridor of the Defiant after having captured Eddington by poisoning a planet and forcing an evacuation of a civilian population. And Dax kind of sidles up to Sisko and nudges him with her shoulder and says, sometimes I like it when the bad guy wins. Like, holy shit. I mean, me too, but like, we just totally poisoned a planet to catch this guy. You're completely fine with that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Jadzia was sick, man. Here's a comment from Opinionville, a.k.a. Jason Harding, the creator of the Ensign's Log and the Late Seating podcasts that I am on. Jason says, Steve, Spock could have been referring to his ancestor being Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. There, inconsistency fixed. Jesus. Referring to a video where I pointed out that there's an inconsistency, a potentially world-breaking inconsistency in Star Trek VI where Spock says, as an ancestor of mine used to say, when you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And a lot of people pointed out that he could have been talking about Doyle, not Holmes. That's fine. That resolves it. But you're missing the point, Jason, and everybody else who pointed that out. I'm not trying to resolve the inconsistency. I like the inconsistency. I like the fact that Spock appears to be referring to a fictional character who is established as fictional in Star Trek as one of his ancestors. I like that. I like the inconsistency. I'm not trying to resolve it. I want to keep it and preserve it because I think it's neat. I think it's a funny in-joke. So stop taking things away from me, Jason. And now these are some comments from my video about why people actually hate the new Star Trek shows. This is from The True Rift, who says, bad news, Steve. TNG was closer to 30 years before Discovery. I know, time flies at terrifying speed. Yeah, you're right. A lot of people pointed out that I got that wrong. I said that Discovery was 20 years after the premiere of TNG, and it was actually 30 years, 1987 to 2017. Just off by a decade. What's the big deal? But yeah, you're right. Time does fly at terrifying speed. Before you even know it, hell, before I know it, I'll just be bones in a grave, man. I'll just be bones in a grave. What was I talking about? Here's a comment from Eddie Edwards. The Discovery, for me, is the first ship I've ever seen in Star Trek where I didn't immediately go, I want to live on that ship. Even DS9, which is supposed to be less sleek and clean, was super interesting to me. The Discovery just seemed dark and cold, like someone had designed it to look cool on screen rather than a place to live and work. I want my Star Trek to be aspirational. I love having a diverse group of characters come together and show the world we could build if we got over our petty human differences, but it's pretty counterproductive if what they create is a world that I don't want to live in. For me, that undercuts the message. I don't feel that strongly about it in terms of undercutting the message, but I agree with you that the ship, the Discovery, is not nearly as... it does not have nearly as strong of a sense of place as previous settings in Star Trek shows have. I completely agree with that. I still kind of feel that way. It's gotten a little bit better as the show has gone on and we've been able to spend some more time on the ship with the people, but I still definitely feel like, especially the Enterprise D, the Enterprise D felt like a place. You had a sense of specific place. Deep Space Nine, big time. It felt like a real specific place. I didn't really get that from Voyager. That's one of the problems I have with Voyager. It's one of the reasons why I consider Voyager my least favorite Trek show, is because I don't really feel that the ship is a real place. You know, it doesn't have a personality that pops for me like the station on Deep Space Nine, or like the Enterprise D, or like the Enterprise and the Enterprise A in the classic Trek movies. They have that sense of place for me as well. And Voyager just doesn't have it. The Enterprise in Enterprise has it to a point, and I really, really like the set design in Enterprise. I think the way the ship looks is one of the strongest parts of that show. So that has a little bit of a sense of place for me. But yeah, the Discovery doesn't really have that, and it doesn't affect my enjoyment of the show to a significant degree, but I am aware that I do not have a sense of place. That the ship itself does not feel as real or as important to me as the settings of previous Star Trek shows have. So I'm completely on board with you as far as that goes. Here's a comment from Mike Gillis. To be fair to those old critics, first season TNG is pretty rough and took a while to find its feet. Yeah, you're right. The first season of TNG was pretty rough, but my point wasn't that critics didn't like the new Star Trek show, because you're right, a lot of critics didn't like it, and just judging the show by its own merit, there are lots of reasons not to like the show in the first season. It wasn't a very good show, but the point I was making wasn't just that critics and fans didn't like the new Star Trek show. It's that a lot of them seemed to not like it, and this was definitely the case with a lot of fans. They didn't like it because it was different. Not because of any other qualities the show had or didn't have, but because this was not familiar to them. And that is regardless of the quality of the show. And again, this is all subjective. You might think the show has better or worse quality than other people. It's completely a matter of personal taste. But regardless of the quality of the show when judged on its own merit, a lot of critics and a lot of fans at the time did not like it simply because it was different. It was unfamiliar, and they rejected it reflexively. And that's the point I was making. Not so much that critics didn't like the show, because yeah, there were lots of completely valid reasons apart from it's different to not like TNG in the first season. Burger Lord 99 says, it works in the other way too. I grew up with the Enterprise series, and I like DS9, Voyager, Picard, and Discovery, but I struggle to watch TOS and TNG just because it's what I'm not used to. Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't talk about that in the video, but it definitely runs the opposite direction. And I know there are Star Trek fans who are huge fans of the movies or of TNG or Deep Space Nine, but they say I can't get into classic Trek. I've tried to watch it. It's boring, or it's too silly, or I find it corny. I just can't get into it. And that's a completely valid opinion. And I think it's something that a lot of people who, view the new shows as illegitimate but would accept classic Trek don't realize is that, aesthetically and tonally a lot of the times, classic Trek is the one that sticks out like a sore thumb from the rest of the franchise. Classic Trek, the original one, is the one that matches the rest of the stuff the least, right? You can talk about how Discovery feels too different from TNG, or Discovery feels too different from DS9. Discovery, I think, aesthetically and tonally, is a lot closer to Deep Space Nine than Classic Trek is to Deep Space Nine. You know what I mean? Like, Classic Trek, in a lot of ways, is very off from the rest of the franchise. And yet the people who hate the new stuff for not being Star Trek enough usually are very accepting of Classic Trek. And again, this goes to my point in the video that it's all about what you are used to. They accept Classic Trek because it's Star Trek. It's part of what they're used to. And the new stuff isn't what they're used to, so they reject that, but they accept this. And there are people who run the opposite direction, who accept the new stuff because that's what they were introduced to. That's the first Star Trek they watched. And then they get to Classic Trek and they're like, what's this? I can't get into this. And it's completely valid. It's completely fine. This next group of comments is from my video about how Star Trek depicts disability. This one is from Roman Lives. You forgot to mention that Bashir himself was also a disabled person who got fixed. Very true. That might be its own video at some point. I think I could do an entire video about the revelation that Dr. Bashir is a product of genetic engineering and that he was genetically modified at the behest of his parents because he had severe learning disabilities as a child and they decided to fix him. I think there's a lot to be said about that particular storyline and what that says about the depiction of disabilities in Star Trek and what life is like for disabled people in the 24th century in the Star Trek universe. So I could do a whole video about that, and maybe I will at some point. But yeah, that's a great point. That although I don't think that at the time of Melora that had not been revealed. I think by the time we meet Serena and the rest of the Rain Man Voltron team, I think that has been revealed about Bashir. We know that about him, and that's why he is assigned to work with them, because he is a quote unquote success story of genetic engineering, and they are not so successful. At least that's the perception. But yeah, that's a great point, that Bashir is a product of parents who refused to accept their disabled child as he was, and felt the need to fix him. And for Bashir, that more or less worked out okay, but we're left with the impression that for a lot of people who had parents with similar feelings who could not accept their children as disabled, it did not work out nearly as well. So yeah, that's definitely an upcoming video topic, and that's a very good point that I did not mention in the disability video. Here's one from James Fennell. As an autistic person myself, Odo stands out for me. He is heavily dependent on routine. He finds social interaction and small talk difficult. He notices details that no other character would and is extremely analytical. He also reverts to his natural state every 16 hours, which could be seen as him masking through the day and then being himself when he gets back to his quarters or his bucket in earlier seasons. That's a really interesting observation. I don't hear people say that about Odo nearly as often. The comment that I'm going to respond to right after this one has a much more frequently cited example of a character that is coded autistic that a lot of people who are on the spectrum identify with. But I don't hear about Odo as often, and I'm glad to hear that, because there's a lot of criticism of Odo for his role as the constable. A lot of Odo is a cop discourse, which I think is completely valid and completely fair and brings up some really interesting points about the character. But a lot of people, I think, dislike Odo for that reason. They don't like him either as a person or even as a character because he's a cop, right? And people have very understandable negative feelings about cops and about policing in general, and Odo kind of catches the brunt of that and is disliked. I've always found Odo to be one of my favorite characters on the show because I don't connect with the fact that he's a cop as strongly as I connect with the fact that he's an outcast. And I've never really been an outcast in my own life. I don't connect to it on a deeply personal level, but I recognize that in him, and I have a lot of sympathy and a lot of empathy for him as a result of that. So hearing that you have, from your own experience as an autistic person, which is very different from my experience, but that you connect with him on a level like that as well is nice to hear. Because I've always thought that Odo was a really, really great character and a really complicated character that is written in a really compelling, satisfying way, who is ultimately someone who, yes, he does struggle to fit in. He does struggle to understand other people and to see why they are the way he views people as puzzles to be solved, and it can make it difficult for him to forge very deep connections with people, although we see that eventually he does. And I've just always viewed him as an inherently sympathetic character, despite the fact that he is a cop and that he has a very, very messy history with the Cardassians that the show brings up and makes a very important point of making a part of his character. So yeah, always nice to hear a fellow Odo lover and someone who identifies with him in a really personal way like that. That is sort of similar to how I identify with him, but also very different because it's based on your own experience. But yeah, good comment, James. Thanks for sharing. Here's one from Lee. As a neurodivergent person, I always saw a lot of myself in Data. He isn't disabled in any way, but the fact that he just doesn't get it when it comes to emotions or a lot of the nuances of social interactions. In a way, he's a very good representation of a person with high-functioning autism. I've heard this about Data from a lot of people. I never really got it until I became more involved in online Star Trek fandom, because again, as someone who is not neurodivergent myself, I never really got that about Data. It just never was a part of my experience. But now that people talk about it, I totally see it. I totally get it. And I understand why. I know there were some fans who were and still are a little upset that they gave Data the emotion chip in the movies. And they sort of, again, they fixed him. And we see him still struggle with it. He doesn't just immediately become, someone capable of seamlessly integrating into society. But the fact that they gave him the emotion chip and he no longer had that quality of being apart from other people or being innately puzzled by other people's reactions and behavior and social cues and stuff. It sort of took away a part of that character that a lot of people really, really identified with. And they thought it just kind of sucked that they fixed him when he didn't need to be fixed. He was fine the way he was, which, that's part of Data's journey in the Next Gen TV show. It's not that, one day he'll be a real boy. One day he'll get emotions and then he'll have earned his way to getting emotions and being a real boy. That wasn't the point of Data. The point of Data was that he was always fine the way he was. He didn't need to become human in all of the ways that matter. He was always human. He was always valid as the way he was. And to give him emotions was to sort of undercut that. Which I think is a valid criticism. Next comment is from Serious Mind. Good video, although I have to say with Pike, he isn't merely limited to a wheelchair, but largely unable to do much of anything. Even his communication is severely curtailed. As someone with multiple disabilities which are progressive, I think there can become a point where it does become a huge problem for the person. I, for one, would not want to be a quadriplegic who cannot communicate. For me, that'd be hell. And this is a point that a lot of other folks made as well, that it's not just that Pike is in a wheelchair, he's also scarred and in pain and unable to communicate easily with people. So people compared it to locked-in syndrome, which I think it's close. It seems like it's close to that. That's a valid point. It's not just that he's in the wheelchair that is depicted as bad, but I still think people who are real people who use wheelchairs, and view the depiction of Pike as living a nightmare as offensive, or at the very least as reductive of their actual lives. I think they still have a valid point of view, because there are so few depictions of wheelchair users in Star Trek. Pike is the most prominent one, and his life is depicted as a nightmare. And that, I think, is the problem. Yes, there are things other than being in the wheelchair that make his life a nightmare, but the fact that one of the most prominent disabled characters, period, and certainly the most prominent wheelchair user in the franchise is depicted, and his disability is depicted in such an overwhelmingly negative way. That is the problem. Not just the specifics of his situation, but what he as a wheelchair user represents in a franchise where there aren't that many characters that are wheelchair users. There aren't that many characters for people who use wheelchairs in real life to identify with and see themselves as in terms of their disability. And that, I think, is the problem. Not just that, Pike is, well, yeah, he's in a wheelchair, but yeah, he has other issues as well. I mean, I get that. That's completely fine to point that out. That's a good observation, but it's what he symbolizes as a wheelchair user that is the problem. Here's one from Sean Ravenfire. I never understood why Pike couldn't just beep in Morse code. We know they know Morse code in the 23rd century because we saw Scotty using it in Star Trek V. It's one of those things where you just have to sort of let them have it for the sake of the story. Yes, and honestly, there are technologies available now in the 21st century that would allow most, if not all, people in Pike's situation to communicate far more easily and far more clearly than the beep chair where it's one beep for yes, two beeps for no, right? It's just, a person like Pike in reality, especially in 200 or 300 years, would not be in that situation. But you just have to let them have it. You have to grant them. You don't have to. You can refuse to grant them the premise. But I'm the type of audience member and the type of critic that I will accept what you are telling me on screen, as long as it's not too insulting, for the sake of the story, right? And we're saying that, well, Pike was grievously injured, and this is his situation. And yeah, sure, there are things in our reality that we can imagine they could have done for him that aren't being done for him in the episode. But this is the premise. This is what we're being told. We're being told this to get to a particular point in the story. So let's just see where it goes, right? It's striking the balance between reality and the needs of the story. And as I've said before in videos, if it comes down to that choice, and you're a writer and you have to make a decision and your options are do what is more realistic or do what is best for the story, I would say do what is best for the story every single time. If you have to do one or the other, do what is best for the story. And I think the Pike beep chair, as weird as this sounds, is probably a choice of doing what's best for the story, not doing what would be most realistic. Here's one from The Singular Parent. I'm a little surprised you didn't mention the episode where Troi loses her empathic abilities and totally freaks out. I think she compares herself to a blind person a couple of times. I almost made that episode an example that I cite, but I cut it out because that video had plenty of other stuff in it that I could talk about, and I felt like that would have made the video too long, and I understand the irony of saying that in this video, which is going to be a long-ass video because I'm responding to a lot of comments. But yeah, that is a problematic episode for a lot of people. That is often cited as one of the episodes where Star Trek does not do a great job of depicting disability, because Troi does lose an ability. She does lose the ability to read people's emotions. And for someone like her who has grown up with that ability and has never been without it, that would be debilitating. That would be something that would require a serious adjustment if she was going to have to live the rest of her life without this ability that she just took for granted, right? And so to an extent, the analogy works. It is like having a disability up to a point, but it's also a disability that she could adapt to, and ultimately it probably would not affect her ability to move and interact with her environment and her society in a meaningful way. There would be a serious period of adjustment. There would probably always be a sense of loss for her that she could not do this thing that she had come to rely on so strongly, but it would not be as debilitating as a real-life disability. So that episode is a problem for a lot of people for that reason, and I completely see that. Michael S., any thoughts on the Pakleds? Oh boy. Yes. So the Pakleds are potentially a very problematic group of people. They could be read very easily, I think, as representing cognitively disabled people. And if they are depicted that way, and if you read them that way, that's a big problem. And in their big episode, Samaritan Snare, in TNG, where Riker even refers to them as, oh, don't they seem a little slow? And of course, a little slow is a way of describing cognitively disabled people that is frequently used in real life and is used to belittle them and dismiss them and treat them as less than, or treat them as incapable of taking care of themselves or participating in society. All kinds of ugly things are done to cognitively disabled people who many of whom are able of functioning in society more than they are given the ability to, or given the freedom to, because, well, they're a little slow. You can't trust them. You have to watch them every minute, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, to the extent that they're depicted and read that way, the Pakleds are problematic and not a good. If you read the Pakleds as an analogy for disability, then the Pakleds are not good at all. I do think there is a way to do the Pakleds to avoid that. And I think, not to toot our own horn, but I think we have done a decent job of it on our podcast, The Ensign's Log, where Jason plays a Pakled character who's become a recurring character named Plarb. And Plarb, I think, is true to the way we see the Pakleds in canonical Star Trek shows, but does not behave in a way that I think invites the audience to read him as cognitively disabled. Because the way Jason plays Plarb is he's not unintelligent, and he's not any of the sort of stereotypical things that are put on cognitively disabled people. He's very literal-minded, and he is utterly without pretension or guile or anything like that. He says very bluntly and very flatly, he says what's on his mind, and he has no artifice about him. And I think that is a really good way to do the Pakleds and keep that personality that they have, and that sort of mood that the Pakleds have, without doing it in a way that makes it seem like you are making fun of cognitively disabled people or using them to stand in for cognitively disabled people in any sort of way. Like my favorite example, my favorite Plarb moment in our podcast so far was when my character in the podcast was on trial and Plarb was called as a witness, and Plarb was asked a pretty typical courtroom question from like courtroom TV shows, which is, would you like to tell us about what happened on that day? And Plarb just responds very matter-of-factly, no. And that's really funny, and also it sort of unlocks how Plarb's mind works. You asked him a yes or no question. He's sort of like Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy in a way. Like, you ask him a question and you're intending to prompt him to tell you about the day that you're asking about. But he doesn't see it that way. You asked him literally, would you like to tell us about what happened on that day? And he doesn't want to tell you about it, so he just says no. And he's not being a jerk, and he's not unintelligent. He sees it as a yes or no question, and he answers it honestly. So I think if you do the Pakleds something like that, you avoid a lot of the problems. But if they are being done as stand-ins for cognitively disabled people, yeah, they're hugely problematic. Hugely problematic. Here's one from Matthias Froze, who says, actually, the question should be, would there be disabled people in space at all? Space is pretty unforgiving and deadly. You need to be at your best to survive it. Yes, in Star Trek it's a lot safer than what we have right now, but take the Army today as an example. You don't see disabled people on ships, planes, infantry, etc. They could have administrative duties on space stations and Starfleet offices, but being actually on frontline stations and starships, it's nothing against them, it's just physical limitations for certain jobs. Now, in the 24th century, I figure we could remove many disabilities like blindness. We already have some technology today that can give hearing and vision back in certain circumstances. Imagine in 300 years. Also, what you said seems to glorify disabilities. It's like you're trying to say, look, Geordi is blind. Isn't that so cool? Now, if he had the option of getting 100% of his sight back, do you really think he would refuse? Getting his sight back won't change the person he is. He's just going to be Geordi that sees now. In later movies, you see him without the visor anyway. There is a difference in treating people with disability the right way and with respect, but it's also okay to try and perfect our technology to try and either remove or reduce disabilities. Doesn't mean the person is bad or wrong, but I'm sure they would prefer not having the disability. I know I would. I've been born with disabled feet that was corrected when I was 5 years old. The side effect is that I have zero stability. Years of training couldn't fix it either. While I am proud of having a good life with it, I wouldn't mind my feet being fixed. Thanks for the comment. A lot to unpack there. First of all, this goes back to a point I made in a response to an earlier comment about, as a writer, having to choose between serving reality or serving the needs of your story. A lot of people left comments similar to a point you make in your comment where they said, well, it's the future, technology is what it is. Would we even expect to see visibly physically disabled people in a Star Trek universe? Wouldn't all of the physical disabilities have been corrected either by some kind of prosthesis or through some kind of genetic fix? Like, would there be visibly disabled people in this future? And I think that is a fair point if our priority is to depict that future as realistically as possible. That is not my priority. As a writer, that would not be my priority as a writer for Star Trek. That is not what I particularly look for as a fan either. When I see a person who has an obvious physical disability in Star Trek, especially if they're like a member of Starfleet, like the unnamed crewman who uses the wheelchair in Discovery that I pointed out at the end of that video, right? You might say, well, why would he have a wheelchair? Wouldn't we have been able to fix whatever is causing him to use the wheelchair? Wouldn't he be able to walk through some means? Why would he have a wheelchair? And if he does have a wheelchair, shouldn't we make it clear to the audience that there is some specific condition that he has that requires him to use the wheelchair? And on and on and on. I don't care about any of that. I'm completely happy to have a person using a wheelchair visible in a Star Trek show because I see that as representation. He's there because there are people in wheelchairs in our real world, and they deserve to see themselves represented on screen. And those of us who do not use wheelchairs, those of us who are not physically disabled or cognitively disabled or neurodivergent in any way, we need to see that diversity on screen. We need to be reminded that people in wheelchairs, people with physical disabilities, people with mental illnesses, people who are neurodivergent in all kinds of ways exist and are part of our society and are valuable as people and have things to contribute to our society and deserve to be here. And seeing them represented in Star Trek is a way of reinforcing that. So I'm not interested in the in-story reason for why is there a guy in a wheelchair. It's the future. Why would he have a wheelchair? Could not possibly care less about that. You don't need to waste a second of screen time explaining that to me. I get it. He's there because he represents real people in our real world, and we want to see them. We should see them represented on screen. That's as far as I need to go with it. And yes, it is an instance of choosing what is best for the story versus choosing what is more matching to reality. And I have no problem with that whatsoever. So that to me solves the problem of would we even see people with disabilities in Star Trek? Yes, we would, because Star Trek represents us and people with disabilities are part of us. That's why they're there. That's why they belong there. And if that is unrealistic to you, they're on a spaceship that travels at thousands of times the speed of light, and they meet aliens that look just like us with some shit on their faces. Realism has never been a part of this. So let's not try to say that, having a guy in a wheelchair completely breaks the world, right? I really don't think that's the case. Something else you said in your comment about how people with disability, you would think people with disabilities would want to be fixed. I think that's up to the individual person with disabilities. Because there were people who left comments on my video that said, yeah, hey, I would sign up. If there was some kind of a fix for my disability, I would want to take it. You know, I would totally be up for whatever the fix, if it could allow me to walk like non-disabled people, if it could fix my vision or my hearing, I would totally be up for it. I would completely be on board with that, right? And there are other disabled people who feel differently. And there are other people who just resent the assumption that they should have that decision made for them. So, I just think it's a little iffy to say, well, if I were a disabled person, I would definitely want that. So therefore, the rest of them would probably want it too. That might not always be the case. You say in your case, because of your condition with your feet, that you would definitely be in that category, and that's great. But not everybody would, maybe, or people would prefer to be able to choose for themselves, rather than just have it assumed that you would want to change this about yourself. So I think that's an important point to make as well. And also, I don't think it glorifies disability. I don't think Geordi being blind and having the visor that can do things that people with natural sight can't, I don't think that glorifies disability. I'm going to disagree with you there. I think it celebrates diversity. I think it celebrates the fact that disabled people are part of society and are valid and have things to contribute, that they aren't just burdens on society, which is a knock that a lot of people put on disabled people. Like, oh, it's our responsibility to take care of them because they can't take care of themselves. That's a really, really dismissive and condescending. Nobody needs to take care of Geordi. Geordi takes care of himself just fine. Lots of disabled people take care of themselves just fine. They might need accommodations, but after they get the necessary accommodation, they can handle themselves just fine. And that's the case with Geordi. So I think it's celebrating that. It's not glorifying his disability and saying, oh, wouldn't it be neat to be blind? I don't think that's the message. And finally, last comment in the video. It is actually from one of my older videos, from a video I did a couple years ago about how Star Trek doesn't understand evolution. And it's a recent comment on that older video, and it's from Andy Hall, who says, "Who was the college professor who hurt you? And can you show me on the Spock action figure where he touched you?" Referring, of course, to my Richard Dawkins impression in that video, where I'm using a Richard Dawkins character to both make fun of Richard Dawkins, who is a dick, and also to point out the various ways in which Star Trek has some really funny ideas about evolution. Unfortunately, I do not have any stories about college professors ruining me. All of my interactions with my college professors were very positive, and they were the ones that I was close to or had any particular opinion of. They were all sort of role models for me. So that was not intended as a diss on college professors in general, just that particular college professor, Richard Dawkins, who, as I pointed out already, is a dick. So if I were going to point out on the Spock doll where my college professors touched me, I would have to say that they touched me here and here. A teacher can really change somebody's life, Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. I will be back in a couple of weeks with another Trek Actually video. It'll be the video about is Data actually too dangerous for Starfleet, which was the winner of the most recent poll. The poll for July's video is currently open. If you are a patron or a member of the channel, go to either the Patreon page, patreon.com/Steve Shives, or go to the member section of my YouTube channel and find the link to the poll, and you can vote in the poll to choose July's Trek Actually topic. If you do want to support this channel, you can do so by becoming a patron on patreon.com/Steve Shives, or by just clicking the join button and becoming a member of this channel at whatever one of the 3 tiers that are currently available works for you. I appreciate all the support I get, whether you are a patron or whether you are a channel member. I could not do this without you, so thank you. Oh, look, I'm doing it. I don't care if it's a ripoff or not. Thank you so much for being a member or for being a patron. I appreciate you. I couldn't do it without you. And I will see you in a few weeks for another Star Trek video, and I'll see you much sooner than that for a video about something that's not Star Trek related, because I make videos about all kinds of stuff. And I hope that you enjoy them, and I hope that you watch them, and I'm very glad that you do. Thanks for watching this one. I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.